Welcome, everyone. I'm Noelle Bakhtian, the director for CAES. We're so excited to be hosting this Solve Climate webinar for the states of Idaho and Wyoming. A few housekeeping items before we start. Number one, this event is being recorded and a link to view the recording will be sent to you in just a few days. Number two, we've muted everyone's audio and video. Please only unmute your audio when called on to ask a question. And three, if you have any technical challenges or a question, please use the chat feature that you should be able to find in the GoToWebinar control panel. And I sincerely ask for your patience as we all navigate this new virtual environment. So let's get started. Solve Climate by 2030 is actually a national and international project started at Bard College by Eben Goodstein and David Blockstein. These simultaneous webinars being hosted across the US and internationally are intended to raise awareness about climate challenges and, even more important, focus on state and local actions that each of us can take part in. So you are right now actually taking part in an event that's taking place across 43 states and 5 countries. As a consortium of Idaho and Wyoming universities and one of the Department of Energy's national laboratories, CAES, the Center for Advanced Energy Studies, is uniquely suited to host this event. Thank you for taking this opportunity to learn more about climate solutions. Over the next hour and a half, we will hear from our panel experts, have the chance to ask questions, and then submit your ideas for big, ambitious, yet achievable solutions. Once your ideas are listed, we will all vote for the top 3 possibilities. State and local action can significantly impact climate policy, helping us all make a positive progress towards solving climate by 2030. I'd like to welcome the researchers, the faculty and students, and the community members joining us today for this session. Particularly, I want to welcome the students because it's involving students in idea generation and implementation that enables them to understand ways that they can influence their future. If you're an educator who needs any online curriculum, the recording of this webinar and interdisciplinary student guides will be available for your use after the fact. I'd like to invite our moderator now, Veronica Vajnik, who is going to lead most of the rest of the session. Over to you, Veronica.
Thank you very much, Noelle, for the introduction, and welcome everyone to the webinar. We will now have a series of presentations by our remarkable panelists. You will be able to ask them questions during the Q&A session. As they're speaking, you can still think of your questions and enter them in the question option of the GoToWebinar, but we will not be addressing questions right away, but rather after all the presentations are done. So our first speaker would be Nancy Basinger, and she will be talking about carbon fees and carbon dividends. On to you.
Thank you. So yes, I'm Nancy. I'm a veterinarian in Idaho, and I'm so pleased to be here. I learned about climate change way back in 2000 when Al Gore ran for president, and I've been paying attention to it ever since. In 2014, I found Citizens Climate Lobby. I was very pleased to see their climate solution and also their values, which is about being respectful for everyone, trying to bring people together around solutions. So I helped found the Boise chapter of Citizens Climate Lobby in 2015. I've been a liaison from CCL2 Representative Simpson's office, and I've been to Washington, D.C. about 8 times in that role to talk to our members of Congress about climate solutions. So I'm very pleased to be here, and I'll just start with my presentation. So this presentation is about a policy that makes it easier for everyone, from individuals to utility executives to venture capitalists, to make climate-friendly choices, because there won't be just one solution to the climate challenge. We'll need to grow a garden of solutions, big and small. But how can we make it easier for new ideas to take root and grow by making it cost more money to do something that hurts the planet and less money to do something that helps the planet? Next slide. Okay, so what is holding us back in our transition away from fossil fuels? It often seems easier to keep doing things the way we always have, but if we stop giving fossil fuels a free pass for putting greenhouse gas pollution into our atmosphere, things can really change quickly. because without accounting for their true cost of use, fossil fuel prices are artificially low and are competing unfairly with cleaner sources of energy. Because we pay to take our trash to the dump, it shouldn't be free to put our trash into the air. Next slide. So, why are liberal and conservative economists united in support of a carbon fee and dividend solution to climate change? It's because they see the lack of accounting for the climate damage that emissions cause as a market distortion. When the climate cost isn't included in the price of fossil products, the market doesn't have all the information it needs to work efficiently. So, for example, maybe your local school has been thinking about replacing their dirty diesel buses with cleaner electric ones. Including the climate costs and the price of that diesel fuel will make it more expensive, which could make the difference in that decision. So we'll still need regulations, but exposing the true cost of fossil fuels works transparently throughout the economy to speed our transition away from them. And that's why over 3,500 of our nation's top economists made the largest public statement ever in history in support of this climate policy. So next slide, please. So what is a carbon fee and dividend? First part is the fee, and then the next part, move the slide again, is the dividend. And then the third part is the border adjustment. So first I want to talk about the fees, which work to lower emissions. Because when we have a predictably increasing fee on fossil fuels, businesses, investors, and consumers have an economic self-interest to look for lower carbon alternatives. The border adjustment means we apply those fees to imported products, so all of our trading partners must lower their emissions or face economic disadvantage. Next slide. And the dividends are what change the economic impact of this policy, because returning the money from fees collected from fossil fuel producers to all residents in equal cash payments leaves no one out. And it results in a net economic benefit for most lower and middle income earners, because the lower your fossil fuel use, the more you come out ahead. And fossil fuel use is closely tied to income level. But anyone can play the climate-friendly game and save money by using fewer fossil fuels. Next slide. So the carbon fee and dividend plan with the most support in Congress is the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. It now has 80 co-sponsors in the US House. But a common concern is whether increasing the price of fossil fuels over time will actually result in significantly reduced emissions without some kind of emissions cap set by government. But an independent analysis of this act by the University of Columbia in 2019 estimates it will drive down emissions in the US by 36 to 38% within 10 years. So that is really effective in reducing emissions. And when carbon fees are recycled into the economy, they act as an economic stimulus, creating jobs. People benefit from cleaner air, and that monthly carbon dividend offsets the higher costs of gasoline and other fossil products during our transition to greater efficiency and low carbon energy. Also, using the market to encourage innovation by accounting for the climate damage caused by fossil fuels connects with the values of most Americans. Because again, at CCL, we believe that enduring climate policy will come from bringing people together to find win-win solutions. Next slide. So what if a climate policy was in most people's economic self-interest, decreased income inequality, resonated with American values on both sides of the political spectrum, and allowed the US to lead the world in the race to a low carbon future? Next slide. So in conclusion, I think that if we as climate realists know we must act to decrease worldwide emissions by 50% within 10 years, then we should follow the recommendations of economists that tell us we need to align market forces to encourage a variety of climate solutions. Because we ask others to listen to climate experts, we should listen to economic experts. And they are telling us that a carbon fee and dividend is the most efficient and effective climate policy. So building awareness and support in our region to get this type of policy into US law would greatly enhance our chances of solving climate by 2030. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much, Nancy. That was really, really interesting presentation. And from the market solutions, we're going to move to Kip Coddington, who's joining us from Wyoming and who will be talking about the carbon sequestration and storage technology.
Yes, so thank you so very much. I'm assuming if folks cannot hear me, someone is going to reach through my laptop and give me a virtual slap or some clue that that you cannot hear me. But first, actually, I want to begin with a couple beginning remarks. First, I want to thank Noelle and the Center for Advanced Energy Studies for her leadership in this programming and more generally just the great work that Noelle and Kays do. Number one. Number two, we're obviously living through unprecedented times in terms of the pandemic. So we're sitting here talking about climate change and the energy transition, and there's competing issues in the public sphere, that being the pandemic. So I certainly hope everyone is safe and sound. So I'm going to be exceedingly brief, and I do not have any slides. So I will just actually make a couple remarks, and then I will take, hopefully, my comments will generate some questions, and I look forward to the Q&A. Just generally, I will say, and it could be because I'm an older person, but just and I'm sitting here in Wyoming, which has a lot of fossil fuels. We have a lot of wind. We generate a lot of renewable energy, but obviously we produce prodigious amounts of fossil fuels. Just a couple of observations. So the title of this webinar is Solve the Climate by 2030. And I would just like to, in a contrarian way, challenge that notion. And that is that actually accepting the climate challenge, can the energy system of any country pivot within 10 years? I'll just throw that out there. And there's a fair amount of literature on that topic. And I think if you sort of understand or get an appreciation how long it takes energy systems to transition, it's sobering. So there are large swaths of humanity that are still using using wood as a primary fuel source. So I'll just leave that there. That if we're trying to do anything by 2030, it is immensely difficult. I'm going to talk a little bit about carbon capture and storage, which is a technology of great importance for two reasons. First, and I'll first explain what carbon capture and storage is, and then I'm going to talk about the two reasons why I think it is imperative to solve the climate situation by whatever deadline may be set. So everyone knows when you burn any fossil fuel or any fuel containing carbon, it inevitably produces as a byproduct of combustion a molecule known as carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas. There are other greenhouse gases such as methane. Methane is natural gas, but I'm just going to focus on carbon dioxide. So when you burn coal, natural gas, and crude oil, you produce carbon dioxide. And instead of emitting that into the atmosphere, you can capture it. And that's the capture part of carbon capture and storage. And then you can transport it via pipeline And then you can either store it, typically underground in a geologic formation, or you can utilize it in a product. And that is generally what the technology carbon capture and storage is about. And carbon capture and storage is believed to be critically important for addressing the climate change problem, really for two reasons. Number one is that it is believed to be the only technology at scale that can manage CO2 emissions from existing fossil fuel infrastructure at scale. So unless you believe that all the natural gas infrastructure in the United States is going to be turned off tomorrow, and that all the electricity generating facilities, a growing percentage of which are now converting from coal to natural gas, unless you think all those facilities are going to be shut down tomorrow, or certainly within the next 10 years, carbon capture and storage is believed to have to be deployed at scale in order to manage the existing fossil fuel infrastructure that I think many people believe is going to continue to exist for, quite frankly, decades to come. And if you look at official US Department of Energy figures from the Energy Information Administration, fossil fuels are still believed to be playing a dominant role in the energy system by 2050, let alone by 2030. So we're going to have to capture those CO2 emissions before they are emitted into the atmosphere, and that's why carbon capture and storage is critically important. That's reason number one. Reason number two, and then I will end. Let's say you believe that all the fossil fuel infrastructure in the United States and even worldwide could be turned off tomorrow. It is believed that the world is on a trajectory where we will have quote unquote overshoot of carbon loading in the atmosphere that will have to be addressed. So from the technology and policy point of view, the debates have shifted from not only do we need to reduce emissions of CO2 into the atmosphere in the first instance, we have to take carbon out of the atmosphere. And those are called NETs, or negative emission technologies. An example of which is direct air capture technologies. And there are companies like Carbon Engineering up in Canada. There's a company in Europe as well that are deploying technologies that take CO2 out of the atmosphere. So in order to solve the climate issue per this webinar, it is also understood that we're going to have to take CO2 out of the atmosphere. And once you do that, you have to do something with the CO2. It's not good enough to just take it out of the atmosphere. You also then again have to store it or utilize it in a way that prevents its re-emission back into the atmosphere. And that also is a role for carbon capture and storage technologies. So for example, I'll give this example and then I'll stop talking. If you had a coal-fired power plant that was co-fired with biomass, the biomass of course has carbon favorable attributes because when you're growing a tree, that tree is taking CO2 out of the atmosphere. If you're co-firing that coal with biomass, and then you are capturing the CO2 emissions from that facility and then storing them or utilizing them in a non-re-emissive way, that biomass co-firing power plant is actually a negative emission technology. It is on a net basis, if deployed correctly, is removing CO2 from the atmosphere in addition to not emitting CO2 in the first instance. So So again, I think carbon capture and storage for a lot of practical and also complicated reasons are believed to be a critical part of the climate mitigation policy and technology solutions going forward. And that's why many researchers around the United States and around the world, and indeed also at the University of Wyoming and elsewhere in the Rocky Mountain region, are researching that technology. And that concludes my remarks.
Thank you very much, Kip, for your presentation. We really appreciate the information, and thanks everyone for sending the questions. We will be addressing them at the Q&A, but keep them coming. And next we have Shannon Breck-Sitten. She will introduce herself and she will discuss what is the use of nuclear energy to combat climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica, and welcome everyone tonight. I know we have a wide range of experience in the audience here, and I hope that each of you is able to garner some new information from this discussion that we had this evening. I'm a nuclear engineer, and I work at Idaho National Laboratory, which is the nation's nuclear energy laboratory for the Department of Energy. I hold several roles and jobs here at the laboratory. One that I really enjoy is I get to work with energy researchers across the DOE complex, specifically with the other applied energy laboratories, with the National Energy Technology Laboratory that develops fossil fuel systems, and with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory that develops renewable energy systems. Next slide, please. So in these various roles, I get to spend a lot of time thinking about the goals that we have for our energy systems, both current systems as well as our future systems. So what are some of those goals? Well, I think we can agree, those of us listening here would like those systems to be clean. We also need those systems to be affordable, as well as reliable, so that we have electricity and other energy forms when we need it. We need them to be resilient against weather events or other unforeseen actions. And we would like them to be sustainable so that they can last for long periods of time. Well, once we all understand what goals we're trying to achieve, we then need to think about how that energy will be used. Will it be used to support electricity, which is primarily what we think of when we think about our energy systems? But do we also need energy to support industry, providing heat and electricity to drive chemical processes? Do we need it to purify water? Do we need it to produce alternate fuel forms, such as hydrogen that can fuel cell vehicles? That hydrogen can also go to many other applications, such as steel manufacturing and fertilizer production, ammonia-based fertilizers. I find it fascinating that if we use clean energy to produce hydrogen, and that hydrogen then goes into the steel manufacturing process, the emissions associated with that steel manufacturing can be reduced by as much as 90% relative to standard approaches. So that's pretty significant. We need to think about how we're meeting those energy needs and what form that energy need is in. Is it electricity? Is it heat? Is it steam? Is that need variable, or is it pretty constant and needs to have constant supply of energy? So once we understand that for a particular region or application, we can then begin to think about what role each of our energy generation sources may fill. And specifically from where I sit, I look at how nuclear energy can best be utilized to meet those needs alongside other generators, and looking at multiple scales with regard to physical size and power levels. Next slide, please. Now, I know many of you have different backgrounds here, so I wanted to say a few words to introduce nuclear energy and let you know what it currently does for us. So if I look across the United States, we have just under 100 reactors right now that produce electricity. And that's their job, is they produce emission-free electricity to supply our electricity demand. Now, if we look overall at the electricity they supply, it's just under 20% of the electricity that we use in the United States. But if we look at the carbon-free generation in the US, 55% of that comes from nuclear energy. That's significant, and that's something that we can rely on to provide those power needs that we have each and every day. On the other side of this chart, you see the capacity factor, and what that means is that these nuclear plants operate almost 100% of the time. So across all of our nearly 100 reactors, they are producing 92.6% of the time. So if I have a reactor that is rated at 1,000 megawatts electric, then 92% of the year, that's exactly what they are producing. And that off time is when they're undergoing refueling and other maintenance activities. If I compare that to renewable energy systems, just as a comparative number, wind generation systems produce approximately 32 to 40% of the time of their rated capacity. And solar photovoltaics produce on the order of about a 30% capacity factor as well. So if we go to the next slide, let's talk a little bit about what nuclear technologies are and how that's evolving. So many of you out there that conjure up an image when you think about nuclear technologies, what you think about is over on the left-hand side of this slide. These are existing nuclear reactors. They're large. They take up a lot of area and they produce quite a bit of electricity on the order of 1,000 megawatts or 1 gigawatt of electricity. They're reliable. They provide baseload electricity 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But because they're large, they tend to sit away from cities. They're a little bit out in the boonies, so to speak. And they don't do much to change from the outside. Well, if we look at what's happening in the industry today, there's a lot of innovation, a lot of new technologies being brought to the forefront. In fact, there are more than 50 different companies currently working on advanced nuclear technologies. Existing nuclear reactors in the United States are called light water reactors. These operate at relatively low temperature of about 300 degrees Celsius. If we look at advanced reactor technologies, those begin to operate at 500, 700, and some even pushing up to 900 degrees Celsius in those designs, which can offer opportunities to integrate with these industrial applications that I mentioned and provide much more efficient use of the energy that's produced. So in the center here, you see small modular reactors. These reactors are on the order of 50 megawatts to 300 megawatts per unit, but they might be deployed in multi-modular units. For instance, the example shown here corresponds to a design by NuScale Power that would include 12 60 megawatt modules. And this allows a different operational paradigm than what we have with a single large scale existing reactor. These plants and these modules can now supply baseload electricity, but they can also supply electricity and heat to industrial applications. They can produce products such as hydrogen. They're much more right-sized to matching with renewable generation systems. They're very similar in their deployment strategy with regard to size. So now we can begin to look at how nuclear energy can be utilized in distributed generation rather than just centralized generation, which is what we typically have today. Moving to the right side, we see microreactors. Now, these are systems that get me really excited and come out of a lot of what I've done in my career in working on really tiny systems and space applications. These systems might be on the order of hundreds of kilowatts to maybe 50 megawatts of electricity. These can provide power at remote locations, such as the small Arctic village that you see in this artist's rendition, but they can also support shipping activities and military installations, remote mining camps. They can provide desalination and even disaster relief, where we might bring in one of these units to operate for some period of time to provide hurricane response and provide reliable power for a region that is desperately in need of that. So if you go to the next slide, we can start looking at how these compare with regard to size. So an existing nuclear plant, these are pretty big. This shows 1,500 acres. Some are more on the order of 800 acres or about 1.3 square miles that take up the footprint of the plant for the plant buildings and cooling towers and everything associated with that. So these systems are custom built on site and they take quite a few years to build. In fact, the Plant Vogtle reactors have been underway since about 2012, 2013, and they're not yet complete. So they take quite a bit of time. These are very large engineering endeavors. Small modular reactors, however, will change that game. I mentioned NuScale. previously, they're working on developing this first small modular reactor plant that's shown at the bottom of the slide. And that will take about 3 years to build as compared to the 10 years for an existing large-scale reactor. These also bring the footprint down considerably, such that the units themselves can be fabricated in a factory and shipped to site and assembled at the site. That is one of the big benefits of these, that reduces the time to build these systems so that we can respond quickly to meet some of these really aggressive goals that Kip mentioned in his remarks. And they require limited site prep compared to the large scale systems. These bring in that plant size to on the order of 50 acres. If we move to the right and look at microreactors, now we're talking about really small systems that can be less than an acre for the footprint of the plant itself. And so, in fact, some of these are significantly smaller size and can actually be not only fabricated in a factory, but assembled in that factory and shipped to the site fully ready to go with minimal site preparation. We've even looked at designs that could be brought to the site and operational within just a few days' time, again, looking at the potential for emergency response systems. So if you go to the next slide, I want to tell you a little bit about how we are considering using these technologies. And it brings me back to the question that I posed at the start of this. What are the energy demands that we're trying to meet? And what metrics do we apply to optimizing that system design? So today, we have really an electricity focus, and we utilize independently our nuclear generation. We utilize fossil fuels, and we'd like to evolve those to fossil fuels with carbon capture and sequestration. We have our renewable generators supporting that. What if instead, if we're really trying to achieve a low carbon future, we look at the energy produced by all of those in all of its forms, whether it be electricity, heat, or steam, and look at how we utilize that not only to meet those electricity demands, but also to meet those demands in industry and hydrogen production and water purification. Today, if I look at industrial applications, they primarily utilize carbon-based resources, fossil fuels, to drive their processes, some of which have significant emissions that need to be captured. What if instead of burning those fossil fuels to drive the heat into these industrial applications, we use those carbon-based resources in chemical processes? We use the clean heat and electricity from our nuclear technologies and from our renewable technologies to drive those processes, to convert carbon resources to end products that you and I use each and every day. So we're trying to shift this and think about an integrated grid system and integrated energy parks that maximize the contributions from carbon-free energy generation sources to meet the needs across all of these energy use sectors. If we look at that aggressive goal that we set out of, fix climate change by 2030, this is a huge undertaking. And in order to get even close to that, we are going to have to use all of the tools we have in our toolbox, all of the clean generation technologies, and we need to get very creative with regard to how we actually accomplish that. So the next slide gives an artist's rendition of what some of these facilities might look like. And I'll ask you to think about, how can we use this energy better? How can we use it to supply heat to greenhouses in the Arctic, such that we don't have to ship in diesel fuel each and every year or multiple times per year to supply those needs, but instead we're bringing a reactor that can operate 5 years or 10 years before it needs to be refueled, so that there's reliable power in these very remote regions. Or perhaps we can bring that energy to purify seawater or brackish water in the ground in a remote desert application. And we've looked at these applications for the Southwest region in the United States, using that clean, non-emitting energy in combination with solar power to purify the water and support those growing communities. Or perhaps we take advantage of the very small footprint of some of these microreactor designs and bring those systems in closer to municipalities, in closer to villages, such that we can drive the industrial applications without emissions and have a beautiful, clear air around these facilities. So challenge you to use your imagination for how we can better utilize these systems and think outside the box, change the paradigm for how our energy resources are utilized to achieve this future that we're all envisioning. So on the last slide, I just want to point you to another resource that you might dive into. I'm really excited to be a part of an effort through the Clean Energy Ministerial, which involves 30 some odd countries around the world, focused on clean energy technologies. This year will be the 11th Clean Energy Ministerial, and we launched this book in 2019 in Vancouver, Canada last year, just after 1 year of having this new initiative on nuclear technologies. This initiative is called Nuclear Innovation, Clean Energy Future, and we look at the roles of nuclear energy in these clean energy systems, and we look at the many different innovations in nuclear technologies that are coming to play today. And this is available for download. I encourage all of you to take a look at that. I've only glossed over so many of the attributes of nuclear energy and how it can interact with these other energy systems to meet these goals that we're setting out for ourselves. So I'll stop there, and I thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shannon. That was an excellent presentation and has generated some really, really interesting questions that we will address very soon. But before we do that, we still have 2 more panelists that we would like to hear from. And the next one is Jerry Zelke. He will introduce himself, but also he will discuss the correlation or relationship between climate change and water.
Hi, thank you, Veronica, and welcome everybody. Thank you for attending this session. It's great to have everybody involved. My name is Jerry Zelke. I'm a former researcher at the Idaho National Laboratory and the Naval Nuclear Reactor Laboratory, and I'm past president of the American Water Resources Association. So my focus is generally throughout my career has been on water resources management. Over the last 10 to 20 years, it's been to a large extent focused on adaptation processes relative to water resources in one form or another. So relative to Idaho and Wyoming, it's often said that water's the lifeblood of our states. That's one of the commonalities you hear when people talk about water resources in Idaho and Wyoming. The reason that is we live in an arid climate. Both states are very dry climates, and we're highly dependent on our water systems. The truth is, everything we do, all the plants and animals we see and enjoy, and every bit of commerce we do, and most of the things we do for fun in some way are tied to water. So the fact that climate change is going to impact those water resources is of great concern to us. So if we think about water, we got to start with the hydrologic cycle, and I realize we have a diversity of people here, maybe very experienced in water resources, maybe not, but just simply the hydrologic cycle is the idea that the earth recycles water over and over again. Water evaporates from the oceans and comes over land and drops on lands. Where we live in Idaho and Wyoming, it lands in the mountains. And there, a lot of it will be incorporated into snowpack, where nature stores water for us and makes it available, hopefully when we need it. That's the art of water management, is making it happen, taking what nature gives us and making it happen when we need it and when we can use it. So the water comes in and we see it in our rivers and our streams, our lakes. It's actually above ground and it's underground. A lot of us won't see it underground, but if you drive around many parts of Idaho and Wyoming, you'll see sprinkler systems that are pumping water up and growing crops from groundwater. So the water flows through our states, and in Idaho, it comes from our mountains and it goes out typically to the Columbia River, which goes out to the Pacific Ocean, or it goes down through the Great Basin. Bear River, it goes down to Salt Lake, down in that area. Same thing for Wyoming to a large extent. It's the Columbia River. It drains actually through here in Idaho out to through the Snake to the Columbia River, and we have some that goes to the Bear River and down to Salt Lake. But you also have water that flows into out into the Colorado River Basin. So what impacts are we expecting from climate on water resources? Well, the 2 main things is quality and quantity. we're going to see some changes in quality because water is going to be warmer and it's going to have some different properties. It's going to impact a lot of our fish and water-related species. But the thing that we think about the most part is the timing. So as I said, in the hydrologic cycle, water comes down to from precipitation, snow and rain onto our mountains, and it's stored in snowpack and in ice up in our mountains. But because of climate change, the temperature in our mountains is growing. It's getting hotter and hotter in those higher elevations. So what's happening is snow is coming and rain is coming. It's packing up, but it's melting off earlier. We're already seeing in both states that we're having earlier runoff of water. And what that does is it changes the timing of when that water is available for us, and it changes whether we can capture it or not. As we all know, we have reservoirs, and we may be able to capture some of it, but frankly, Mother Nature can do a better job of storing water than we can, and she can capture more and hold more than we can do in our reservoirs. So if it comes too early, it's going to go downriver. We're not going to have use of it. And it's also going to impact in unregulated areas. It'll impact fish and wildlife. So how do we use water in our states? Well, in Wyoming, 96% of all the water that's used is used for irrigation, for irrigated agriculture to grow crops and such. In Idaho, 86% is used for irrigation. And so those are big uses. They are the majority uses by far of what we use water for, but that's not something you and me as individuals we're going to impact too much. There are some possibilities as individuals. I'll talk about those in just a minute. But for the most part, we're interested in what can we do individually. So where can we impact? Well, irrigation is the big use, but where we can impact is through our domestic use or through the use of public water supply. And public water supply is just the formal name for the water we get from our city or town. And that's water that's provided by the municipalities to us. And primarily what we can do as individuals, the first line that we can do is we can do water conservation. And we can do that either in our home, at school, or at work. All of us have the ability to do some. So for younger students, I understand we have some young students on board, and there's simple ways to save water. If you're using water, turn off the tap when you don't need it. Simplest thing. When you're brushing your teeth, put some water on your brush and turn off the tap. Put the water back on when you need it to rinse off or rinse out your mouth. Shower rather than bathe. We actually use less water when we shower, as long as you're not a shower hog. Water before it's hot out. When we water in the middle of the day, it's hot out and that water evaporates off quickly and it's not used as much by our plants. So water early in the morning. Rather than using a hose to play with all the time or to clean things, try using a bucket of water and a sponge. And just things like that where we can reduce our water use. You can see them all around the house. There's all kinds of things you can do in order to save water. Just look close and think, is that wasting water? Is it saving water? If you see things that are either wasteful or if you see leaks, if you're a young student, talk to a sibling or parent or see if you can work with them to help reduce the wastage or to fix the leaks. So families, if we look as a collective, older students and family members in general, we can save water from indoor use by doing things like only running your washing machine and dishwashers when they're full. Don't do just a few items. Use a low flow shower and put aerators on your water system on your taps. And install dual flush or low flow toilets. Those are really pretty cheap and easy to do. Those are some simple things we can do indoor to save water. Outdoor, actually we use more water outdoors typically than we do indoors, because actually what we do is we consume more water outdoors than indoors, because when we use it indoors, we flush it or drain it down and it typically goes into the ground and it's usable again by somebody else. When we use it outdoors, what happens is it evaporates out and goes away and it can't be used again. Right, in any time soon anyways. So things we can do there is xeriscape your yard, and that just means simply go find native plants. Take up your Bermuda grass or your bluegrass and and take some local desert plants and landscape your yard. If you're not up for that, at least don't overwater your lawn and don't water it during peak times. So we can ensure, or we can help ensure that we don't waste water by putting in rain sensors, or we can capture rain and use it. Put a water barrel outside and capture rain off your roof and use that water to water outside instead of water from your tap. We can also plant a rain garden and capture stormwater runoff from the roof or from your driveway or other hard surfaces and use that water rather than using water that we processed and cleaned up to drinking water standards. Other things you can do is monitor your usage. Look at if you have monitoring in your town or your city, take a look at your water bill occasionally and say, am I really using water carefully? Am I using it the best that I can do? And if you have a city that has an auditing program, which actually many cities in the Pacific Northwest have that. I don't know so much in Wyoming or Eastern Idaho, but many cities have people that will come out and look at your system and audit it and tell you where you can improve. Also, when you're learning stuff, as you read and you learn things, as you experience things in your house, share that knowledge with others. Share it with your neighbors and your friends. Share it with people at school. So students, teachers, and professionals, I guess my best advice is study, teach, and practice in fields that can help either mitigate or to climate change or to adapt to the climate change impacts. Water's a very interdisciplinary program. It's a very interdisciplinary resource. Water touches every aspect of our life almost. So everything from sociology to mathematics to biology to hydrology. Study those areas. Study whatever area that interests you and figure out how it works with water. But study deeply and study diversely. And by deeply, I mean is really understand whatever you decide is your field of study that you want to concentrate on. Study that deeply and really understand it. But then look for diversity. Look where that has common ties to other fields. When I think of my field of hydrology, which is the study of water, I also think of engineering. I think of physics. I think of meteorology. I think of all of these other areas. I think of sociology and psychology and economics. All these areas that also tie into my study of hydrology. And then the question is how does my hydrology impact those fields? And how do those fields impact my hydrology? Relative to professionals, what I'd say is the best thing you can do is find good interdisciplinary groups, find professional societies, government agencies, NGOs, etc. Find those areas that are working on fields of interest to you that are tied to water and get involved with them. Find a place where you can work with others, either professionally or as your avocation. I know in my career, I was lucky enough to be able to be a professional scientist and work on these issues, but I also worked with not-for-profit organizations on a regular basis, helping them with their issues relative to water resources. So find those groups that you can get involved in and get involved deeply with them, help them out. And then as a professional, craft your career so you can be involved in helping discover things that we can fix or do, or help make decisions that will improve the situation relative to adaptation or mitigation. So other things we can do, looking in the broader picture, as citizens, contact your local municipalities, your county, state, federal agencies, contact your legislature. Let them know your observations about where you think we can do better, where we think we have problems. Climate change, I went outside, I went to irrigate, I put my pipe into the ditch to get some water to irrigate my field and it was dry. It's an observation. Tell them about it if you think that there's a solution that you can offer up to help make things better. Suggest changes in laws, policies and laws, or volunteer to be on an advisory board. I know I am, and I'm sure a number of the others that have been speaking or will speak here are on advisory boards. Sit down with local officials who want your talent and your time to help them figure out issues and how to address them. And I would say vote. Vote for people that are educated in climate-related issues and that are concerned about it And I won't say, I don't want to be political at all at this. What I want to say is find people that are akin to you and what you believe is happening and what needs to be done, and vote them in. But make sure you vote in people that are smart and educated and very interested. So, and then hold those people that are elected or hold your leaders accountable for working on issues to address either climate change or response to climate change, and reward them and let them know when they're doing good things to help the situation. So what else can you do? Everybody can be what I call a water detective. Everybody can be a person that's always looking around and saying, what's going on? What can we do about things that are not going well? How can we propagate things that are going well? How can we fix things? We can learn these things and we can share those ideas then with others. And together, if we work together, then we can fix a lot of these problems. And finally, what I'd say is the number one thing you can do to help us with climate change and water is get involved and stay involved. And with that, I'll take any questions later. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Jerry. That was a very insightful presentation, and we are looking forward to hearing our next panelist. That's Jen Pierce, and she will talk about climate change education and what we can learn from the current crisis that is virus related. How can it be related to climate?
Thank you so much to all of you for attending this virtual webinar. I'm broadcasting from Victor, Idaho, right near the border of Idaho and Wyoming, so that seems appropriate. Thanks so much to Monica and Veronica for their work getting this up and running. My name is Jen Pierce. I'm in the Geosciences Department at Boise State University. I'm a third-generation geologist, and my father and grandfather spent much of their careers mapping, often on horseback in the greater Yellowstone area. Times have changed a little bit since then. My research focus in the Boise State Geoscience Department now is on soils, how landscapes evolve, climate, and wildfires. I always joke with people that I went to school for 12 years to tell you that fires are bigger and more severe when it's warm and dry. Come here, girls. But I'm not here today to talk about my research. I'm here because I'm a mom. I have 2 little girls in elementary school, and I'm worried that our kids are not getting the knowledge they need to succeed in a changing future. I bet that many folks listening have kids or grandkids in the Idaho school system or Wyoming school system, or maybe you currently are in school or involved in the educational system. Idaho is already experiencing the effects of a changing climate. Wildfires are larger and more severe. Our agricultural systems are shifting. Water quality and quantity have diminished, and we are increasingly experiencing severe health impacts from wildfire smoke. However, even though 4 out of 5 parents would like climate change taught in schools, few teachers have the tools, training, and support they need to address this challenging topic. Idaho's state legislature has watered down our K-12 science standards and removed content addressing climate change, even though Idaho's teachers, Idaho's industry, and Idaho's parents support strong science in our state. It is because of this issue that I've devoted much of my time and energy to volunteering in the K-12 climate science education community. For the last 3 years, I've spent hundreds of hours of my own time teaching climate change in Idaho's K-12 schools. I've also taught over 50 teachers in professional development sessions and will be co-teaching 2 more classes this summer. My goal is to help provide teachers with the tools they need to teach about the challenges and opportunities of climate change in Idaho. Now, here is the silver lining. Idaho's students are innovators and they are fired up. I know this from teaching at the kindergarten through university level and from my interactions with student-led groups in the community. Our kids are naturally interested in developing clean energy. Some of my favorite examples from some 4th graders include solar-powered skateboards and solar vests that keep you warm in the winter and cool in the summer. Kip and Shannon, these kids are very interested in carbon storage and in nuclear. Idaho has abundant clean energy sources, including hydro, wind, solar, and geothermal. Idaho Power has pledged to go 100% clean energy by 2045, and a recent Stanford study estimates 24,000 new jobs in the renewable energy sector in Idaho alone. We have the opportunity not only to teach our kids about the causes and effects of climate change in Idaho, but the opportunity to teach them how to better use Idaho's cleaner energy resources to help our economy. To help provide the climate educational resources to the community and connect the vibrant group of researchers at Boise State, I have developed a new network called iClear, the Idaho Climate Literacy, Education, and Engagement and Research Network. This group is housed within the Boise State Hazards and Resilience Institute. iClear will provide our students with a background to understand the causes, consequences, and solutions to global climate change and its impacts. We will actively engage in stakeholder-driven outreach to K-12 schools and communities to provide them with the tools, training, and skills that Idahoans need to promote proactive resilience within our own communities. We will conduct state-of-the-art research to transform our systems of land use and energy. Addressing these challenges will expand our innovative ecosystem, further our educational mission through research, and produce graduates who will be the next generation of leaders in climate solutions. Next, I want to give a few shout outs to folks I hope are listening. First, to my husband, Dave, who's tuning in all the way from Boise, Idaho, and our friends. The girls are happy to see you. Shout out to the members of the Boise Sunrise Movement and the Boise Extinction Rebellion Youth Movement. A shout out to Sheba and the 70 members of the North Junior High Green Club, a student-led organization to educate students on the climate crisis and environmental issues and to engage our school and community in sustainability initiatives, including improving recycling, addressing food waste, and promoting sustainable transport to school. A shout out to XR Youth of Boise. Extinction Rebellion uses nonviolent civil disobedience to call on elected officials, many of whom will never see the results of their poor decisions, to take action on the climate crisis. A shout out to my students and colleagues at Boise State who are leading the charge on creating a sustainability plan for Boise State. Morgan, Ari, Kat, Tiara, Emily, Darren, I'm talking to you. I want to give a shout out to the amazing teachers, Jamie in Northern Idaho, Miss Mizuta, Erin Stutzman, the Sierra Club, Citizens Climate Lobby, Idaho Conservation League, and the other groups devoted to protecting our planet. So what are my top climate solutions? Obviously, as you might have gathered by now, education. I know that providing our students in our schools with the knowledge and skills they need to address the causes, consequences, and solutions to climate change needs to be at the top of our list. I hope you will join me in this effort to help our kids, our state, and our planet. What can you do? In the words of Katharine Hayhoe, the most important thing you can do to solve the climate crisis is talk about it. Then address climate change with what you are good at and most passionate about. Get engaged with one or more of the many organizations out there who are fighting for our planet. If you would like to get involved with climate education, please contact me. You can find my email, jenpierce@boisestate.edu, in the Geosciences Department at Boise State. So go Broncos. I wanted to close with some comments, which I said in my title, about climate change and the coronavirus. In the words of Shiva Rajbandari from North Junior High, Shiva says, as far as climate change and the coronavirus, many students feel upset that lawmakers can act so quickly to fix a problem which affects their demographic, but are very slow to act to address the climate crisis, which has been a known problem for 50 years and will significantly impact today's youth and young adults. One thing that COVID-19 has shown is that governments are capable of rapid action and funding when motivated significantly. This gives hope that such rapid action is possible to address the climate crisis as well. Now I'd like to end on a quote from Emily Wakefield, the Director of Environmental Studies at Boise State, on climate and the coronavirus. What does this mean? She says, I'm humbled by the possibility of what the virus teaches us is possible if leaders step up in terms of pausing and potentially reorienting society and economic priorities. In the words of Daniel Gilbert, a psychologist, people respond to pain, things that are personal, abrupt, immoral, and now. The coronavirus addresses all those criteria. Climate change to many people does not. We need to make it so through our science and through our communication. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jen. That was a very inspiring presentation. And now it's time for our Q&A. So now I will be trying to work through as many questions as I can, but be sure that if you submit a question, we will address it at some point, maybe not during this webinar, but we will follow up and the speakers will get your questions. So first, there were quite a few questions about the technology itself, and I would like to direct these questions to Shannon and to Kip. And let's frame it as we're trying to solve climate change, this big problem, are we inevitably creating a new problem? Say, if people have concerns about nuclear energy, are we trying to solve climate change but then creating the waste problem? Or if we have carbon sequestration, are we trying to solve climate change by creating another problem with our technology? How would you address that?
I'll go ahead and begin. Thank you, Veronica. And I did scroll through a lot of the questions. Solving climate's tough. Reducing our emissions is tough. I think we've seen with the current pandemic and reduced travel, we see cleaner air around the world in different regions simply by not going anywhere. Unfortunately, I don't think that's really the solution either. And when we look at our energy sources, we have to recognize that each of them has pros and cons. Each impacts some sort of resource. We need to understand the availability of those resources, the sustainable practices in mining those resources, and the waste at the end of utilization of those resources to produce our energy. So we do have to understand that just by creating these energy systems, by producing electricity, we will have an impact. And our goal is not to eliminate all impact. Our goal is to minimize any impact and to reduce any negative consequences. So I bring that up because nuclear often gets this question about what about the waste? First, I'd like to recast that and say that waste is really spent nuclear fuel, or even better said, used nuclear fuel. There is a vast amount of usable energy still in that fuel. And many of these advanced reactor designs that I spoke of are looking to how they can utilize previously burned nuclear fuel that comes from a different reactor in their reactor technologies, thereby for even further reducing that end product at the end of the energy production. We can also recycle nuclear fuel and pull out the pieces of that, the components of it that can still be used in generating energy. Our Assistant Secretary for Nuclear Energy, Dr. Rita Baranwal, when she came into this position just in this last year, announced that she wanted to restart some of the research associated with fuel recycle in this country. That is a process that's used in other countries. It's well known, and it is something that we can implement very safely and without proliferation of the high level waste that would be extracted from those components. So I want to say that everything will have an impact. And the other point I wanted to bring up with regard to used nuclear fuel is all in all, over the course of all of our operations of commercial nuclear reactors in this country, all of the used fuel, every little bit of it could be stacked on a football field less than 10 yards deep. It's really not that much. It is long-lived, and so we need to store it securely for a long period of time. But there really isn't that much of it, and we know where every little bit of it is. We can track it. We know exactly where it's located. Unfortunately, we can't say the same for all of these energy resources. And it's a valid question, understanding by trying to solve one problem, how are we potentially introducing other problems? I have to say the nuclear field is likely the most regulated field out there, the most regulated energy source, and we do know how to manage these things over time. Thank you.
So this is Kip. I will be exceedingly brief, and I want to actually, Veronica, in my opening remarks, I neglected to offer my thanks to you as well. I wanted to do that now, and I just wanted to echo Shannon's point. First of all, the question is incredibly savvy. So as this energy transition proceeds, smart technologists and lawmakers and policymakers should be looking at these systems on a life cycle basis, because it actually, the law of unintended consequences does apply, and it is not unusual for a policymaker to be in all good faith solving one problem and then creating another problem. And I guess that could all be summarized by the phrase, there is no such thing as a free lunch. I do think with for better or for worse, and sometimes in an eye-opening way, it's interesting the challenges facing renewable energy systems. So I've only been in academia for 5 years. For the preceding 20 years of my life, I was a commercial project development lawyer, largely trying to do commercial energy projects. So I have a deep appreciation, some might call it scar tissue, on what it takes to do even renewable energy projects. So just a couple of examples. So and we're doing some of these analyses at the University of Wyoming, and some of these studies are being done around the world. In order to produce grid-scale energy storage systems, batteries, a lot of those technologies that are understood today at current levels to build out renewable energy systems, many of those systems require materials that are called rare earth elements. And rare earth elements are produced from the earth. And so even in building a wind farm or a Tesla automobile, you need materials that come from the earth. So you're either mining them or you're reprocessing them in some way. But just because you're building a wind farm or a wind turbine, it doesn't mean you don't need steel. It doesn't mean you don't need minerals. It doesn't mean you don't need mining. So all these issues are complex. Another example would be transmission. And here, I won't name the name of the wind farm, but one of the largest wind farms in North America is under development in the state of Wyoming. And that wind farm intends to wheel the electricity down to Las Vegas and they're over into Southern California. I bet if we did a survey in the Rocky Mountain West and on this webinar, 99% of the people would say we need that wind energy. It has taken that project developer more than a decade to permit the transmission for that wind farm. And part of that is because it's crossing private lands, federal lands, state lands, because the benefits of that wind would be received in Southern California, but everyone between here and there has a view shed problem. Even in Wyoming, which has wonderful wind resources, the many conservationists that are worried about migratory pathways for pronghorn antelope and elk, they're seriously worried about siting wind farms that would disturb migratory patterns. So again, just a caution that all these issues are immensely complex, and they really get complex when you put your feet in the commercial world and you try to develop them. So to be in the energy space takes a fair amount of patience and humility. And again, there's no such thing as a free lunch, but all of us should be doing these life cycle analyses to make sure in our good faith efforts to pursue low carbon outcomes, we aren't inadvertently creating more challenges that our children and grandchildren are going to have to resolve.
Thank you very much, Kip and Shannon. Those were excellent answers. I would like to follow up with another question of, we are talking about a very urgent issue. We would like to take action very quickly, yet a lot of the technology might not be yet there, or we're talking about solutions that are possibly too slow. So I would first direct the question to Nancy and see, can we make the tax incentives fast enough and effective enough to make a change quickly? Similarly, that question goes to Jerry. If we are talking about personal actions that might take a long time, should we just address directly, for example, agriculture and irrigation and large industry action, or scale up the technology that we have?
Yeah, thanks. So I noticed there was a couple comments related to this. The reason I talked about individual action was mainly because that's what we were asked to discuss, is what could individuals do to get involved. And what you can do on the bigger picture is join up with other like-minded people. Specifically, in my past, I've been very much involved in conservation groups. I helped start Idaho Rivers United, and we worked to try to remove the 4 lower Snake River dams. We weren't successful there, but we were successful in some removal of some other dams around the Pacific Northwest, or better regulation and such. So to a large extent, if you're in a hurry, and I can tell you this from working in actually in a senator's office. I worked for Senator Harry Reid when he was the majority leader of the U.S. Senate. How you get big action quick is by having a lot of people, and especially a lot of people that are noisy, that are active, that are connected, and bring them together, and you go to and talk to the people in power. But as an individual, you're not going to move a U.S. senator. Just us as everyday people, you're not. You're not going to move a legislator unless you're a personal friend and you have great conviction and are able to explain that to them. For the most part, we get collective power by joining up with other people that have the same focus and issues and level of imperative that we have. So it's a very legitimate thing to say, we need to act now, so we need more power to move forward. But always I would want individuals to be moving forward, but also have your individual and your collective things that you're doing to try to move things forward. That's how you get things done more quickly. Does that answer the question, or?
Thank you, Jerry. Let's hear from Nancy.
Okay, I'll just tag on to that a little bit. Again, we are Citizens Climate Lobby, so we certainly know that idea of banding together with the power of many voices to strengthen our personal voices. Exciting to me about, again, the analysis of the Energy Innovation Act by Columbia University, and they found again that starting a low tax, but one that is very predictably increasing, really moves resources quickly, because industries want to look ahead and they want to plan and get ahead of the game. So their analysis would be that within 3 years, the Energy Innovation Act would have decreased the emissions that were on the 2030 goal of the Clean Power Plan. That was, of course, never did happen. So I think that taxes, because they work throughout the economy, not just in 1 or 2 sectors of the economy, and if they're predictable, they can actually move a lot of resources very quickly. And again, that 36 to 38% emissions reduction within 10 years is pretty powerful. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Nancy. That was an excellent answer. And unfortunately, we have to move into the next part of our session. We will address your questions, but we will be answering them over email. So please be sure that we have received them, and we really think and appreciate them. But what we would like to do now is to actually hear from you. What do you think are the solutions? And to do that, we're going to move into the think tank platform. You see the slide, and that's also the information that you have received over the email of how to access the platform Think Tank. The session number is 224, and the passkey is 12345. So what are we actually searching for in the Think Tank? We ask you to think of one solution, one ambitious but realistic solution to climate change in Idaho and Wyoming, and enter it in Think Tank. We will be then voting what is actually the top solution, the top 3 or the top 10, but we ask for one solution from each one of you. So as we're doing this, I will also move my screen so that you can see how it looks live, but you should also be able to see that on your own monitor. So here, if you see also a similar solution to what you're thinking, you don't have to necessarily enter it, because that will be already there. We will be sorting through them. So what do we have here? We want to change the economy and technology. Absolutely. Thank you so much for sending them. Just feel free to keep uploading them. We have a lot of knowledge and a lot of people in this webinar, so we would like to hear from you for sure. So I see also more support for renewable energy incentives, carbon fees, more sequestration through regenerative agriculture. Absolutely. So I see that there are some emerging topics like more support, more taxes, more levies. I think, for example, the number 3 and number 4 are fairly similar. That's about the government incentives. Cleaner transportation grids, absolutely. I see that there are some questions about what the website is. I will really quickly show you the information once again so that you can access it. It's thinktank.inl.gov and the session ID is 224 and passkey is 12345. I will give you a couple minutes as you're thinking about the solutions. We will be talking through them and then you will be voting on what you think are the key solutions. Let's see. More media literacy. Clean energy utility. Sustainable forestry. Eat less beef. So I see number 16 is fairly similar to 4. We have carbon sequestration with native plant communities, but also regenerative agriculture. Those can be fairly similar. So the land practices, green public transportation infrastructure, include climate education and science standards and education K through 12. I see that number 14 and 18, I think, are very similar. We could probably merge them. We have supporting energy efficiency programs. That is probably similar to our government support. We have a couple of those. That's definitely an emergent topic. And I think voting is very similar. So we have number 12, we have number 22, if keeping it general, so really focusing on voting information. So number 22, we have another session about, or another proposal about subsidies and taxes. I think that again comes into the government support, something that we have in number 3 in multiple proposals. That's definitely an emergent topic. Climate education for policymakers, not only for students. Absolutely. I also see number 15, that's ecological knowledge from indigenous communities. That is definitely an important point. Let's give it 2 more minutes so that you can enter your final ideas, and then we will go through the solutions, consolidate so that you have some major points to vote for, and then we will have the vote. Sustainability standards to all businesses, absolutely. Incentivize carbon-friendly practices. That's something we are receiving from the GoTo webinar. Okay, excellent. I think we will be now aggregating the solutions, and then we will be moving into voting. So what do we see? We have the carbon price, so we could probably move number 4 to number 1 and focus and think of the number 1 solution as really working with government incentives and taxes. So that is a very big proposal of really supporting the carbon fees, any kind of subsidies or carbon-friendly practices. We have education. So number 2 is carbon education K through 12. That is definitely another solution. We have holistic grazing management, and I think that that's something we can move under number 4. That's regenerative agriculture, so managing the land properly in sequestering way. We also have the manufacturers and businesses. So that is definitely a proposition. So something that we saw from as one of the suggestions. Regulating methane as pollutant from fossil fuels. I think that that is similar to the industry regulation. We could probably move that together with number 5 and think of it as the industry solution, really forcing our industry to act. We have building technologies. That is definitely a separate solution. We have media literacy, green public transportation, traditional knowledge, carbon sequestration, absolutely. Sustainable forestry, that is something we can, so number 17, that is something we will move under 3. And under 3, that's where we also move number 4. That's the sustainable land management or sequestration through land management. We have eat less beef, so that's more of a personal choice, and that will be a separate voting item. Okay, so we see there are a lot of different solutions. I suggest, as you're looking through them on your screen, I would suggest that you now move into voting. So we have seen that there are some emerging topics. We have reduced consumption, we have taxes, we have sequestration, we have some industry regulation. We are keeping all the solutions for our further use, but we would like to hear, what do you think are the most important ones? So we're going to move all of these solutions into the voting. And that would take just a couple of seconds so that you can later on click what are your top 3 choices. So now you see that the voting is open. You can scroll through and you can see the solutions and you can cast your ballot. You can see what is the most important solution to you so that we can see, well, what are the top choices? And we will give you 1 or 2 minutes to do that as we are trying to wrap up the session, and so that we can also find the top 3 solutions for our 2 states. Let us see. I will be also casting my vote. I am part of this voting process so that you can see how that process is done through Think Tank. And we will move into our final section of the discussion. So let's see how the votes are coming. So we have our top 3. We have the carbon fees for now. Let's see, we have agriculture. So really focusing on industries, really focusing on what are the solutions at scale. We have climate education, K through 12. So I see that the ballots are being processed. Keep voting if you're able, if you can access the website. Also, if you were not able to access the think tank, please feel free to send your solutions to us, and then we will be able to incorporate your solutions. Now let's see what are the top ones. So what is emerging? Please keep voting. We have a couple more minutes and then we will be announcing the final solutions.
Hi all, as we're waiting, I just wanted to do a few thank yous as we're waiting for the final votes to be cast, and we'll share the results. A few final thanks to our wonderful panelists. Thank you guys so much for joining from across 2 states. Of course, our moderator, Veronica, who's been shepherding us through this whole thing. Our IT hero, Eric, you've been incredible over the last few weeks helping us set this up. Phyllis, who coordinated the think tank, and of course, the hugest thanks to Monica Dudenhafer, who's our K's Research Education and Innovation Specialist, who has organized this entire event. This has been multiple months in the making with the national and international crew. So huge thanks to Monica. I'll turn it back over to Veronica.
Thank you very much, Noelle. And also from my side, thank you everyone for participating. Thank you for casting your ballots. We have a few more moments to go, and then soon we will see the final solutions for climate change in our states. But what it seems, as of now, it seems like climate education is really in the lead. All right, let's take our last 30 seconds, and then I will ask Noelle to announce our top 3 solutions before I let you all go for your nice evening. And here I see some more votes coming in. Thank you for that. Excellent. Well, we're going to pause on the voting for now, and I will ask Noelle to announce our final solutions.
Sounds great. I'd love to. So it looks from all of your votes, and thank you for all your ideas here, that our top 3, the first one is including climate education in the K-12 science standards in Idaho. And then we have 2 tied for second place. One is the carbon fee and dividend as proposed by the CCL group. And then the next one is talking about also about the Citizens Climate Lobby to put a price on carbon. Did I get that right, Veronica?
I think so. I think those are
okay.
fairly, that's
well,
what our
the ideas are in, the votes have been cast. We are absolutely going to follow up in an email with all of our attendees with the materials from this, including all the ideas. So thank you for that, and look for that. And finally, thanks to the 125 people that joined today for this CASE event. And with that, I'll close it out. Have a great night. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful night.